Okay, well, here's another dynamic that touches on the edge of that. Now, I heard this rumor this morning. We talked about this. We haven't talked about it on a podcast yet, but the hot rumor has been that the ACC and the SEC may engage in some sort of merger, for lack of a better term. And Jay Billis tweets this, and I would presume this is him quoting himself from what he said on ESPN today. I'll read you the quote. This is from Jay Billis's Twitter account. Quote, if I were the SEC and the ACC, I'd merge, and I'd form essentially the NFL and the NBA and have a 32-team conference. You'd essentially only have to play each other, and it would be the dominant force in the college sports landscape. Now, it's interesting to me that I was hearing whispers about this thing this morning, and now you see Jay Billis, who's very tied into the ACC, tweet that out.
What would you think about that? I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's the traditionalist in me where I'm just like, is that what we want? I know it doesn't matter what we want.
Well,
no one
wait,
cares.
hang on a minute. That horse is out of the barn and has crossed the county line already, right? So now it is
16 though is completely different from 32, and I'm like, I don't know, but I get it. Like I understand it from a business standpoint. I completely understand.
Here's where it gets interesting. Okay, you have the college football playoff expanding, and now you're going to have to go to subdivide all these teams, right? And you could have maybe a 4-pod system. You could have 8-team divisions. You could have one in the ACC, one in the SEC, or excuse me, leagues there with 8-team divisions. But the point is, okay, let's say you go to the pod system, which has been discussed, right? And then all of a sudden you have 8 pods between those 2 leagues. Maybe each one gets a bid into the playoffs. I don't know how that works, but I think all of a sudden, if you have sort of a combination of the ACC and the SEC, right? What have been the major gripes, right? You feel like if you're a team that's really struggling and you get the wrong schedule on the wrong year, then you're buried before the season starts. Now, maybe with some realignment in pods or divisions or whatever that is, perhaps you're for Kentucky trying to take your program to the next level. In some way, the pod system perhaps gives you a better chance to do that if the alignment's done correctly. Geography is also the other thing. Maybe there is some synchronicity there between the 2 leagues to, I don't know, geographically realign and perhaps cut down the travel times and all those things. I feel like I'm sort of spitting into the dark here, but it is interesting that you have 2 leagues on the same side of the country discussing this at the time where we're talking pods and expanding the college football playoff and all those things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, you're not the only one that's probably been trying to say, all right, you could go this way, you could go that way, or the other way. There's a lot of different, I think, directions you can go with this, and that's going to be the biggest thing, right? We've talked about all of this, but I think that the scheduling and the divisions or the pods or however that ultimately winds up, whether, again, we're talking about just in the 16 team sense or eventually a 32 team sense, that is going to, that's going to mean everything for certain schools and certain sports. Like we know that. We mentioned a couple of them earlier in the week, for teams, let's say, that have struggled or in pretty rough spots in terms of, let's say a Vanderbilt or Arkansas that are trying to kind of claw their way up in football. Programs like that. Yeah, it could come down to just as, okay, what does the SEC decide when it comes to where we're going to be slotted and all those other things. So I think that's, I can't imagine, again, if we're talking about not just staying at 16, but going to that 32, I can't imagine what kind of headaches that could produce. But look, I also, like I said, I was kind of half joking when I was like, maybe I don't want to see this. I don't want to see it kind of go to that professional model where you have a 32 team league or something. But I know this is probably the way of the future now, given the way things are going. And even if, let's say, it doesn't happen immediately, I think you're going to see it happen sooner rather than later. just because there's money to be made. TV partners aren't going to hate it. I'll say that ESPN's not going to hate that at all. And there's a lot of money to be made for everyone. And I think from that standpoint, we're only going to go upward in terms of the numbers, probably in the SEC in terms of the schools.
Well, let me give you a scenario here too, okay? Let's say that you're a Vanderbilt, which is desperately struggling to get its head above water again after an 0-9 season. And Clark Lee's got a tough job. And we talk about Vanderbilt often because if you're new to the show, we both live in the Nashville area. We have covered that program. We know a lot about it. That's a dynamic that is very familiar to us. And so I'm thinking if you're them, okay, you're looking this and you're going, oh my gosh, we could grab Oklahoma and Texas next year for all we know on our schedule. And perhaps that comes at a time where Alabama comes up in the rotation. And this is with Vanderbilt in the East. And I mean, all of a sudden, a coach who is struggling to get his program just back to anything resembling respectability, his job just got a lot tougher today as things stand. But let me throw an ACC-SEC agreement at you, and you can see how this changes dynamic. What if, say, you play 7 games against your league or something like that, and then you play 3 quote-unquote out-of-conference games against the ACC? Well, all of a sudden, you might draw a Virginia or a Boston College or somebody like that. I'm not picking on those teams specifically, but those are the teams that when you start to think of the teams that are not traditionally dominant in football and maybe better opportunities for wins playing some of the teams in this league right now,
Yeah.
I do think that an ACC-SEC agreement of some sort, if that includes, okay, you are now going to be playing, let's say that they do it like the NFL, okay? Because in the NFL, you're going to play every team every few years. And a 32-team league is what they've got in the NFL. So let's say that you've got your division. I don't think that you're going to see teams playing divisional opponents home and home, right? But you'll see them play, if they're 4-team pods, you'll play everybody in your pod once a year. So that's 3 games of your 12 as it stands now. And then you got your 9 that you do something else with. And I'm presuming you'll play some other teams and some other SEC pods. And then maybe you do it like the AFC and the NFC do, that you've got, you play another division, right? If you're the NFC West, you play the AFC West one particular year. Maybe it is an alignment to where you see that with the SEC and the ACC.
Yeah, I feel like that's probably the only way you could do it. Yeah, you could follow the NFL model, I think, in that sense of scheduling and such. And I was just sitting back and thinking, I was like, what do you think the college football playoff committee would think if, like, you get, let's say, Clemson, right? Because in the ACC, in that scenario, Clemson joins the mix. And it's like you're sitting back thinking, all right, let's say on the regular season schedule, you've got Alabama, Oklahoma, Clemson. Pick one of the other teams that are probably going to be in the top 5 from the SEC, Georgia, Florida, whoever, A&M. And it's like, what happens? Like, if they actually are, let's say, probably the 4 or 5 best teams, and they play each other during the season, they beat up on each other, one team wins, the other wins. Like, what do you do? Like, I mean, can you keep some of those teams out? Like, because if you're going to go to whatever, let's say the expansion to 12 or whatever, maybe at this point, who knows what that would throw into it if you go to 32 conference? Like, who knows how any of that would look? But I'm just thinking, like, my goodness, that would just be a wild scenario. Just to be like, all right, who's going to be the national champion when maybe in all likelihood 4 of those 5 teams that maybe are the best in the country have already played each other once during the season. And it's like, you just play again because they're probably the best teams out there. And it's just, gosh, it's such a wild thing to think about. And knowing that 10 days ago, we weren't even considering a week ago, we weren't even considering any of this.
And meanwhile, the TV networks are sitting there saying, yeah, we're good with that.
Oh, my goodness. Of course they are.
You don't care about all those things.
No.
You like the ratings, and I don't blame him. I mean, I would too. But let me bring up another aspect of that schedule, okay? And this is not an original thought. I've heard some other people express this today. I think the Revel Grove podcast brought this up. But let's say that you're Boston College. You were never going to get Alabama to come to your place and play. If you're Vanderbilt, you're never going to get Clemson to come to your place and play.
Yeah.
Under this scenario, like,
right.
I think we have had the focus all along is, does this bury the bottom teams in the SEC, the ones that are trying to get their heads above water? now this has a chance to do some things for those teams that I don't think we'd really pondered before, because now some powerhouses that might never come in your building under any other circumstance might be mandated to be on your schedule going forward.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, like we said, I mean, Texas isn't playing at Vanderbilt. Oklahoma's not playing at Vanderbilt. All these other different ones. And of course, like I said, we can apply that to others. I mean, Texas probably not going to Kentucky. Oklahoma's not going there. Some of the others. I mean, and again, the natural ones, right? Like Texas and Missouri and Texas A&M aren't playing, and now you've got all these different scenarios. But yeah, like the ones, let's say that again are trying to have that fight back up. I mean, I think you probably put South Carolina in that category in terms of football too now, to where you're probably not going to see Clemson or never mind, I say Clemson, right? Of course you're going to see Clemson in South Carolina because they already play. Texas and Oklahoma, that's one. You're probably not going to have that opportunity. So it is something, and again, I think that's the fascinating part. Is like behind closed doors. I'm sure there are so many different things being said at a lot of different schools, and there are probably a lot of different opinions on all this. But at the end of the day, you know what? Everyone's probably going to make a lot more money, and I think a lot of people are probably going to be okay with that, just in terms of what this could eventually look like. We already know, what's official now with Texas and Oklahoma, but what this thing could eventually look like for schools and revenue. And we said this, like, think about what the past year and a half has brought about, and a lot of schools are probably taking a hard look at things like revenue and that kind of stuff. This is going to add a lot of that in terms of the potential that you could get from this kind of setup.
Okay, I just had a wild thought, because this is the season for wild thoughts. Okay, in the NFL, what do you see now? You see Thursday games, you see Monday night games. Sometimes you see two Monday night games. If there is an agreement between the ACC and the SEC, I think obviously
Yeah.
ESPN or TV, whoever has those contracts, is going to have a big say in what happens. That's my next question: is what does that do to the TV schedule, game times? Are we going to see more Thursday night type games, maybe even a Friday night game? Now, I don't think that's likely,
Yeah.
because that interferes with coaches'
Yeah.
abilities to get on the road and see games and that sort of thing. And where I think this falls apart is who is the rights owner for Monday Night Football right now. Well, it's ESPN, which is going to control this. But it is interesting to try to think about how this could affect football scheduling as it pertains to TV.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's the scenario where you would, I mean, I would imagine you've got more than just the Saturday games. Like you could play multiple games on Thursday night, kind of be in that situation. I think, to be able to do that. I was just thinking too, what CBS, they're not going to have the SEC, right? I'm trying to think of that. I don't know why I can't
I
think of this.
believe that game's going to ESPN, is it not?
That's what I was thinking. I had a feeling it was like it had to be ESPN, right? So like that's another one where it's like, man, if you're CBS, you're thinking, my goodness, wish we add a few more dollars in there to get that, because that would be. I mean, you think of the spectacle there now with adding Texas and Oklahoma, but I think you would in that scheduling setup. I feel like you'd have to, because you couldn't play them all on Saturday, right? Like again, if let's say now look with a 16 team, sure you could, but if it eventually expanded to like a 32. I don't think you'd want all your games just on that Saturday. I feel like because again, there's only so many hours, right? You're not going to be spreading them out throughout that. I feel like for visibility purposes, you want to give a little more even as you can. But then it comes into, all right, there's some scheduling hassles with that too. If you have multiple games on a Thursday night, all right, well, those teams, what's their layoff until the next game? Like it's just, I think that's why I wouldn't take that job, because it's probably very difficult. But I feel like that's how you would have to do it. I feel like Thursday, Saturday would probably be your best way to do it in that scenario, perhaps. But then again, I mean, look, the NFL, they have games on Thursday nights too, and that's a tough thing. You really want to go. Even the worst NFL games probably going to draw pretty good ratings, and so I think a lot of that, certainly still to be determined. I think with how they would do that, and like you said, I don't think there's any way they're doing anything on Friday. Because in Texas, high school football just perhaps pretty on a high scale too, as it is everywhere. I think certainly in SEC country.
I think we have found the blueprint for how ESPN the Ocho becomes reality.
Well, they may not have a choice. We may be calling games at some point because I mean they're going to need a lot of commentary teams if they go to 32. So we don't have any plans to exit or anything, but listen, if we need to start live streaming games on our YouTube channel or something, we'll do that.
Well, I do wonder because the inventory of games is going to be an issue, and it's a good issue. But like you said, I have to think that you'll start seeing more of these games played on different days. I also wonder if you might not see the double bye come back under that scenario
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think
because
about
that
that.
spreads out your inventory a little bit more. Well, that because once you start playing on Tuesdays and Thursdays, if you're playing back to back weeks, that gets really hard to do. I mean, in the NFL, it's hard enough already, but you're adding class and all those things to that too. And so that is the other thing that I wonder if that comes back into play.
Yeah, I didn't think about that. That's there's so many different things like that that probably when we stop talking, we're say, "Oh, we forgot about those 18 things we probably could have mentioned with this whole scenario." It's just like things just keep popping up, and you're like, "My goodness, this is it's something like it changes the game completely." And as we said, this could just be the first step in doing that.
Well, and look, it seems to me the logical step if the ACC and the SEC have some sort of a merger or agreement or whatever language we attach to that, don't the Big Ten and the Pac-12 have to team up in their own way?
Yeah, I mean that's where you're fighting an uphill battle already. I mean at that point you've got to you're like, all right, we can either go down individually or we can team up and try to figure out how to make this work to combat the problems, especially like we said in college football is going to be the big one. But yeah, it's there's a lot to figure out. And I think for other conferences now, like we said, we're not even talking about just the teams in the Big 12. We've got a lot to figure out. But these other conferences too, once they start to look at this scenario and even in the scenario as it stands now with Texas and Oklahoma joining, that's not even to mention the potential 32 team system. If you're the ACC would be fine, but the others would have a lot to figure out.